I think we should get started. I want to say thank you to everyone for attending today's session of Navigating Life's Changing Seasons, End of Life Planning for You and Your Family. This session is being recorded, as are all sessions in this series. Today's presentation will be led by parishioners Julie Grohovsky and Melanie Folstad. Melanie and her family have been members of St. John's for 18 years. Melanie is a financial planner and advisor who is very active with St. John's and the community. She is currently the chair of the Community Foundation of Montgomery County and serves on the Diocese of Washington's Personal Finance Planning Committee, as well as many other activities throughout the area. Melanie will discuss ways to safeguard and protect your finances at any age and offer suggestions on how to approach the subject of money with your loved ones. Julie and her family have been members of St. John's for 17 years. She is an attorney and former prosecutor who will be sharing how her mother trusted her dishonest care receiver and offer tips on how to prevent it from happening to you or your loved ones. Julie, please begin.
Thank you, Kathy. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but I appreciate the opportunity to share my story and to get our conversation started about navigating life's changing seasons. Kathy told you a little bit about my background. Like many of you, I am a member of the so-called sandwich generation. I'm a daughter, a mother, a grandmother, and a daughter-in-law, a niece, a friend, and I'm married and have a full-time job. In other words, sometimes there can be a lot going on. In 2017, my 87-year-old mother, Marion, was living in her own home in Youngstown, Ohio. She loved living in Ohio, where she was down the street from her younger brother and surrounded by other family members and friends. And she did not want to move closer to us, even though we had made it clear to her that she could. My family honored her wishes, and like many people, I tried to keep tabs on her from out of town and visited as often as I could. We helped her financially, and we knew generally what was going on. But we did not keep close tabs on her, and we relied on her to tell us if she needed anything. This worked for a while. In July of 2017, she fell and broke her hip, and I went to Youngstown and stayed with her in the hospital for the 2 weeks she was there. When she got out of the hospital, she wanted to continue living at home, so we hired aides to care for her. First, 24-hour day aides, and then eventually we were down to one aide who came for 8 hours a day, and her name was Annette. Annette worked for an agency and told us that she had cared for 2 other elderly people who had passed. My mom was relatively easy to care for once her hip was healed. She had no major illnesses, and Annette was more like a companion for her. She took her grocery shopping and running errands because my mom didn't drive. Sometimes they went to the park or a local museum or even out to lunch. My mom seemed to be doing well, and we were happy that she was happy. We knew she was forgetting things and slipping a bit mentally, but we tried to emphasize the positive, what she could do, and in doing so, maybe we missed some signs. We were also happy that she had an aide that we liked. In the fall of 2018, Annette mentioned to me that my mom had been buying a lot of things with her credit card. I asked my mom about this, and she said, well, not really, but maybe she had done a little shopping at the mall. My mother had never been careless about money, so I wasn't worried, but I did make a note that when I was going to go home for Thanksgiving, I was going to check her credit card statements, and I thought maybe it was time to get online access to her checking account. We already shared the account and my name was on it, but I didn't have online access. I had to go into the bank to do that. Lucky for me, at this point, I was on my mom's checking account, and we were already comfortable discussing money issues. The day after Thanksgiving, before I had time to address her financial issues, my family went to lunch and my mom wanted to treat. We helped her get out her wallet, and saw that there was absolutely nothing in it, no cash and no credit card. She was terribly embarrassed and upset and said that she had gone to the ATM with Annette to get money for the holiday. We told her not to worry and that her money and credit card were probably at home. When we got home, I called Annette and asked her if she knew where my mother's money and credit card were. She began lying, saying that they went to the bank, but they only got out $100 and then my mother had spent it. And we found out later that they actually took out $300 and my mother only got $100 of that. Eventually, we found the credit card hidden in the back of a drawer. I looked in the drawer where my mom kept her bank statements and they were all gone. Annette told us that my mom didn't like having the paper laying around. And then Annette called to say that she wouldn't be coming into work because her daughter was in a terrible car accident in Texas and she was leaving town to care for her. It was around this time when we first started asking my mom what was going on that my mom was rightfully upset. Someone she trusted and knew had duped her and she was embarrassed. She asked if we could just pretend this didn't happen and let it go. I felt for my mom, but I was not going to let it go, especially since I began thinking that my mother may not have been the first elderly person that Annette took advantage of. And I certainly didn't want to let it go so that she could do this to somebody else. I called the company Annette worked for, and they fired her immediately. They had done a criminal history check and other checks, and they had all come up negative. But they had been very supportive. Now, at this point, I was my mother's medical power of attorney because I got that in the hospital when she broke her hip. But I was not her financial power of attorney. So I had to get that into place right away. It was difficult to do that because she was upset and confused. And I needed to be able to show that she was confident enough to actually give me the financial power of attorney. I called a high school friend who is an elder lawyer in Youngstown, whom my mom knew and liked. And he worked with her to explain to her what was going on and to have her sign a financial power of attorney. I think it helped that she knew him personally and that he knew her well enough to say that she was competent. If he had questioned her competency, I would have had to go to the court to get help. Once I had the power of attorney in place, I was able to get all of my mom's statements, which weren't many, she's bank statements and credit card statements, and to put together a list of what she had taken. To make a long story short, I got all the statements and was able to show that Annette had forged her signature on my mother's checks to pay for her own cable bill, most likely took some cash whenever she took my mom to the ATM, had her hair done on my mom's credit card when my mom had her own hair done, and ran up personal charges on my mom's credit card for things that were delivered to Annette's own house. In all, Annette ordered about $6,000 worth of items off the internet, stole some cash, and had her cable bill paid for a few months before we caught her. I wrote all of this up and through my high school friend got the name of a detective in the local police department. Now you have to remember, I'm a former prosecutor, so I was comfortable with this, but you could hire a lawyer or call the police on your own if something like this happened to you. I went to the police station with my list and my evidence in hand and ended up speaking to the detective. In the end, he was very helpful, but initially he was hesitant. He said, "This will be hard to prove. It's your 87-year-old mother's word against the aide. The aide's going to tell us that your mother gave her all this as a gift." But I stuck to my guns and went through the evidence, and he decided that it was worth taking a look at. Later, the detective used all of my evidence and my handwritten notes to confront Annette, and she confessed to everything and was charged. The prosecutor was then a little less enthusiastic about the case for all the same reasons the police had mentioned. And I actually had to go to Youngstown several times for hearing that the prosecutor allowed Annette and her attorney to continue once I walked in the courtroom. But I stuck to my guns, and eventually Annette pled guilty to 3 felonies. She did not go to jail, which was never my family's objective. We wanted her to have a criminal record, so she couldn't do this to anyone else. Once I had certified copies of her convictions, I sent them to the local elder care agencies in Youngstown, and at least one of them took her off their list as a potential hire. I was also interviewed by the local TV news in a segment about how to prevent elder abuse. So some of the takeaways and discussion points for all of us that come from my story. First, have powers of attorney in place. And if you're a person, well, we all should have powers of attorney in place, but you need both the medical and the financial. And I know Melanie will help us talk about this a little bit more. The second thing I would say is, if you or your family are victimized, please do not be ashamed. There are people who prey on the elderly and the vulnerable. Seek help. After this happened to me, so many people told me stories of this happening in their own families. Some of them told me it happened in their families and they did nothing about it because of the shame. This includes police officers, judges, and other lawyers. Wow. I'm telling you this not to make you paranoid that it happens to a lot of people, but to say, don't be ashamed and stand up for your family. Do something is another lesson. I realized it was easier for me to march into the police station than other people, given my background as a prosecutor. But anyone can call the police or hire a lawyer or financial person to help you. Do something. I felt terrible that my mother had been the victim of a financial crime, but I felt good about myself that I didn't let it go unanswered. I felt it was important to look out for the next guy. We didn't prevent Annette from stealing from my family, but we stopped her from doing it to someone else. That's all I have.
That's great, Julie. Thank you so much. The embarrassment and the shame seemed to be the main feelings your mother had. Would that characterize it properly?
Yes, I think that's right. And also just, I think it was confusing to her that someone that she trusted and spent probably at that point the most time with, because, you know, family and friends don't come 8 hours a day. Right. So I think she questioned her own judgment, which people of all ages would do if they were the victim of a crime like that. So yes, and I think she would have been happy to ignore it, but she was also happy that I took over.
That's great. I've had experiences, I'm sure everybody has, where you get the phone call or the email message, text message that says, this has gone wrong, that you must do something right away. Just the other day, I got one from Amazon, which appeared to be from Amazon. And they said that my package, there was a problem with the package and I needed to contact them. So I did, foolishly I did, and started to fill out the paperwork and then realized they were asking for my social security number, at which point I knew it was a scam. And that's one of the main things scammers will do, will ask you for your bank account number, your social security card, your social security number. And those are two elements that most places don't ask you for. Is that right, Julie?
That's right. And I think, you know, anytime you get a message like that, or, you know, a lot of part of this is the sort of, when they call you, the sense of urgency, right? They'll try to make you feel that something's urgent, so you have to do it right away. And that way you don't have time to think about it or even mention it to somebody else and say, oh, this is happening with Amazon. And you just do it. So yeah, I think it is important to be careful with our information and to know that nobody's needs that information ever. I mean, even the IRS won't call you and ask you for your social security number over the phone.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The only one you really need to give it to, I guess, is the doctor's office when they ask for it. But you're there and you know you're at the doctor's office, so it's safe. I had an experience once where I got a phone call that my son had been arrested, and I needed to go to the Bethesda jail immediately and get him out. And I, of course, called Earl immediately, jumped in the car, raced down to Bethesda police station, walked in, and of course he hadn't been arrested. And they said, "Ma'am, where do you live?" And I told them, and they sent a police car because they said typically what will happen under those circumstances is they will get you out of the house so they can rob it. And we were lucky. The police showed up, I guess, before anybody else did, if anybody else was coming. But when it's your family member, your gut reaction is, "Oh my God, I've got to do something right away." And a lot of times you need to step back, I think, and think it through. Would he really have been, where was he at that time? Could I call him? Could I talk with him? And I just reacted from my gut.
Yeah. And you could call the police station and ask, is this person there? But you did something very naturally human. I mean, the same way that people call and suggest someone's been kidnapped. I mean, it's much more likely that you're being scammed than that your family member is kidnapped. But when you receive the call, I'm sure it's very scary.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and my situation is a little different than those, which is it's somebody that built up trust with my mother. And that's sometimes can be harder in different ways. And that the person you're relying on to protect your parent is the person who's actually ready to steal from your parent or worse.
Right. And a lot of times they do build up the trust before they do anything.
Yes.
Anyone else have any questions or comments you'd like to make at this point? Just step up and identify yourself.
Do you want to come up?
Hi, Julie. It's Peter Plocky. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing this really unfortunate story. And you did mention that that the agency that Annette worked for had fired her, that they were helpful. Could you talk a little bit more about what else they did, and particularly, did they take financial responsibility for your mom's losses?
Sure. So I had a good relationship with the agency because I was on the phone with them a lot, when I lived out of town, and I called, and then when I went through, one of the documents I got was a list of the days Annette worked. And I went through all the times that she ordered things online and all the days she worked. And there were many days that crossed over. And that really bothered me, that thinking that she was sitting on my mother's couch ordering things from Amazon. So they had their lawyer call me, and he said, the family who owns the agency feels terrible and blah, blah, blah. And, everybody likes your mother so much, but, oh, by the way, we don't have to pay because we did all the checks. And I said, look, I'm probably not going to sue them over $6,000, but I got to tell you, it just sticks in my craw that she sat on my mother's couch and stole from her on these days when she was working. And he said, can you send me a list of those days? And it came out to like $4,000 or $5,000 of the $6,000. And I sent it to him, and they sent me a check.
Wow.
So, yeah. Now, the other problem, which became quite a problem, was Bank of America. My mother had never put more than $50 a month on her credit card. And the good news about all this is Annette only stole from us a short period of time. And because my mom didn't have a lot of money, there was only so much she could steal. But my mother only literally $50 a month. And all of a sudden she had thousands of dollars on her credit card, and Bank of America never issued it, all delivered to somebody else. Bank of America never issued a fraud alert, never. And so they wanted her to pay. And I was not luckily on her credit card account. And so I stepped in as her financial power of attorney. And we went around for months and they wanted her to pay. And I kept saying, look, you have an elderly person who never uses her card, and suddenly thousands of dollars of stuff is being shipped to another person. This is your fault. And they would not listen. And my mom literally owned nothing. I mean, we owned her house. She didn't have a car. And so finally I started, they sent these statements and these nasty letters. And finally I said, you should turn this over to a collection agency. Please, please, please turn this over to a collection agency, because they're going to tell you this is nuts. And they turned it over to a collection agency after like 6 months. And the collection agency called me and I explained the situation. And the guy said, well, clearly this is a mistake. I don't know why they think I'm going to be able to get money from your mother. And I said, thank you. Please, you deal with Bank of America. And eventually, literally 6 or 7 months later, Bank of America dropped it. But if I had been on her credit card statement, they would have made me pay. And certainly I felt that, given the circumstances, which were so dramatic, from so little money being spent to all this money being spent and things shipped to someone else, I felt that they did not do a good job protecting her. So there were things to be done, but she didn't owe any more money, which she wouldn't have been able to pay anyway. And we did get some reimbursement from the agency. And yeah, I must say, if we didn't have an agency, there would have been nothing we could do. The court also ordered her to pay restitution. She only paid $500. And then eventually the case got, in Ohio, they don't go to jail. And then after so many months, it's dismissed, and it was dismissed without our approval. But, again, it was more about making sure she couldn't do this to someone else again.
Great, thank you. We have people online who've raised their hands, so we'll go with Rosemary first. You're muted, Rosemary.
Yes. I just wanted to comment about what you said about Amazon. I get those emails regularly, and because unfortunately I was scammed like in 2010, I am extremely vigilant. I watch my bank account every other day. So when I get those emails, I have learned how to block them. I just go, I block, report as spam, and I'm done. I don't even give it a second thought. So that's another way. You just keep blocking them, because many of the times these people are not even in the United States. Right. So I just block them, because I know they can't come to, even though sometimes you'll get, I get all kinds of weird calls. I just hang up on them, or I pick up the phone and scream at them. I mean, I've become immune to it, because I know they're not here. And they're just trying to find ways to make money. Yeah. And they think, if they tell you, the package that you ordered, I keep getting one, we weren't able to deliver your package. Please, verify your address. Yes, immediately. I'm on it. It's not happening, because I know, I know better now after so many years. I just block them. Blocking, I've become an expert at blocking. And then I go to the Verizon, because I also get lots of phone calls. Verizon.com, you can go in and block numbers. Easy. Yes. They can't call again. That's the end of that. I mean, I approach it a different way, since I suffered back in 2010 when it happened, and it was it's unarming. It's not nice to find that you're scammed and they took money and things like that. And I even went as far as reporting it to the Montgomery County Police. And the guy was very nice. He said, look, they're not even in this country. Don't worry about it. They can't show up at your door. Even though they make you think they can. Yeah. But he said they cannot. And if they do, well, you call us. So, I just wanted, I guess because I've gone through it, I just approach it. And it's very important to check your bank account regularly. Yes. I don't know if everybody does that. I basically do it every other day. It's become like a part of my routine. Because you never know. Yeah. People try, somehow or the other they can get hold of the cards. Not so long ago, I saw something strange, and I called my credit union. I said, You know, I was noticing a difference in my balance, and I said, I don't know what that is because I don't have anything pending. And they checked, and it was something from eBay. And the lady said, we need to cancel this card right away. Can you come down? So I went. No, you have to be, they're slick. They'll try with little amounts, you know, sometimes to then withdraw bigger amounts. Yeah. But I mean, obviously, my situation is totally different to Julie's mom. That, you know, there was a trust there with somebody in your house. Right. But either way, you know, just be vigilant, check your bank accounts regularly. I think that's really important. Okay. As often as possible.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks.
Thank you. Now in the parish hall, I'm sorry, I can't see who it is.
Hi, this is Tricia. I just have two kind of related questions. One is, how can you know that the person you assign as your power of attorney isn't going to steal from you? And number two is, if you're single like me with no children, who do I pick?
Those are good questions. I think Melanie probably will address those as well, but I think it is worth thinking about, and you can also have professionals, and Melanie can talk about that a little bit more, who you hire for those positions. And just because, you know, I mean, you do even also have to think about your family members. I mean, just because someone's in your family, they may not be the best power of attorney. So I guess our point today is, those are great questions, and we sort of are glad they're asking them, because that's what we want to spur in people is who would you have? Who can you ask? Mm-hmm. And how can you set things up to protect yourself? And your best power of attorney may not be a family member in any event. It may be somebody else.
Thank you. Earl O'Donnell.
I just wanted to share another story because it offers another alternative for dealing with a financial scam. Some years ago, I was visiting my mother, Kathy and I were, and her uncle, who lived close by, and joined us. And he brought along a lot of materials, and he sat down well away from my mother's ears and showed me that he had made for him a very large investment in something that most people wouldn't want to do unless you're pretty expert in the area, and that was currency investment. Changes in the dollars and the Deutschmarks allows you to buy dollars when they're cheap and sell them when they're not cheap through, in this case, a company that had this very slick brochure, but no apparent credentials. And this was before we really had internet access, so it was harder to chase these things down. But it looked very good. They were honest enough to show losses on some days, but most days made money. And he made some money early on, so he invested a whole lot of what was to cover the rest of his life. As a smart investor for most of his life, but this one, he just was a bit of a curmudgeon, and he didn't trust big investment houses. So they were all friends for a few months, and then the money started not coming, and he called them, and calls weren't returned. Weeks passed. So finally I was up there, and he showed it to me. I was pretty alarmed, particularly since he no longer reached anyone there and hadn't for a considerable period of time. I happened to be was a lawyer with a large law firm, and we had a large office in New York, which had at that time a partner I knew who was formerly an assistant attorney general in the Southern District of New York, which is the financial epicenter. And I called him, and he says, this is postal fraud. And that's maybe the main point I want to get across is there are lots of ways of engaging in fraud by phone, by internet. But if you use the mails, it's also a federal offense to use the mails for fraudulent conduct. So he contacted the Postal Service, which saved me some steps because I would have had to go from the top up, or from the bottom up. And so he quickly reached somebody. I sent the materials, mailed it. In the old days, you did a lot of that. And the post office was astoundingly quick to see this. They checked their files. There may have been some other complaints. And within less than 2 weeks, they had organized a team that gotten a search warrant and entered the premises where this place was and found it to be vacant. These are called boiler room operations. They find some bit of property, basement of a building, and they run their telephone and other scams and then they leave quickly. So I wasn't as successful or as adroit as Julie. I didn't get anything back from my uncle, which was really tough on him. The family came forward and helped financially. But the point was that if he had contacted me earlier, but he was ashamed, he did it as a last resort rather than first resort, we might have nailed these guys. The message to, I think, everyone is, if the males are involved with a fraud, you have another place you can go and to look for help. That's it.
Thank you. Well, let's turn it over to Melanie now and hear what she has to offer. Melanie.
Thank you, Kathy. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. I'll try and speak up. No. Really close. Okay. All right. How's that?
That's better.
Okay. All right. Good. All right. Well, and thank you all so much for sharing. It's these stories, I think, that are really so indicative of what was really louder. All right. The yell at my children voice. Okay. So as you've heard from Julie, I mean, this it's certainly something that happens and can be really pretty dramatic. And we've all heard from others too that have had similar experiences. You can even talk a little bit about still now. Okay. Maybe like really close. If I do this, is that better? Yeah. Okay. All right. We're going to give this a try. So the focus of the comments that I'm going to make are going to be really on two topics, and I'll try and address some of the questions that you've brought up as well. But first of all, how do you safeguard your finances? And then we're also going to kind of then transition a little bit into how do you start to share your financial information with your family? And I'm going to use terms, and I'll say family, but I don't want you to just think about that in the traditional sense, because not everybody has a spouse or kids, or so you may be a chosen family or people that are close to you. So I'm sorry that the language isn't always as appropriate or as relevant to each of us, but we'll talk a little bit about how that works. And then I'm hoping at the end, and perhaps even as we go through, there'll be some time for question and answers, because we really want to make sure we're giving you the information that's most helpful and useful to you. So I'll just talk briefly about some of the statistics. Estimates are that financial exploitation of older Americans is around just shy of $3 billion a year. And I think that number is grossly understated. And for many of the reasons that we've already sort of touched on is that there's a lot that doesn't get reported for a variety of reasons, whether it's just not acknowledged, you just don't know how much you may have how much has been taken from you, or there's a lot of shame around this. And we want to really try and take that away, because one of the things that's important to realize is that financial exploitation really cuts across all of the demographics. It is not indicative of you being naive or uneducated or anything like that. People who do this are really smart and have really given this a lot of thought, and it would be almost impossible for any of us to be completely protected against this. So what we're hoping today is just to help bring your awareness up a little bit and give you a community where you can talk more about this, learn more about this, and try and protect yourselves as best as possible. one thing that's interesting, and I kind of question the statistic a little bit as well too, but it's believed that 90% of the financial abuse that happens by somebody that's within your own family or a close friend connection. So while we all are familiar with all of these emails that we get from Amazon or AOL but they actually represent statistically a relatively small proportion of the actual successful cases of financial exploitation. So we have to kind of be aware on several fronts of where we might be vulnerable. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what are the signs that we should be looking for when trying to identify cases of financial exploitation. And some of these have already been touched on, so I think this will be something you've already heard today. Anything that suggests rather unusual activity in an older adult's bank accounts, including large or frequent or unexpected withdrawals or transfers. And Julie already said very clearly that that was something that she had experienced with her mom's. ATM withdrawals by an older adult who seldom or never uses a debit or an ATM card. And this, I can think about this so clearly with my own parents who, despite being really savvy and sharp, they don't use debit cards. My mom still writes checks. So when we see anything that's happening on her bank account that suggests her debit card, it kind of puts up a little bit of a red flag. If you start to notice any sort of sudden non-sufficient fund activity, such as unpaid bills or trouble paying for things that previously you've been able to afford or a loved one's been able to afford, that probably is an indicator that you need to do a little bit of digging. If there's any suspicious signatures on checks or just completely outright forgery, and unnecessary or expensive home repairs. My husband's mom was victimized in this way. And then any types of altered wills or trusts. If you notice estate planning documents that are being reviewed and updated and sort of happen suddenly or without all of the relevant people sort of being included in the conversation, you probably want to do a little bit of digging there. All right, so let's talk a little bit now about, oops, did I do that right? One more, oops, I'm pushing the wrong button. No, what did I do? All right, thank you. Very good. So what do you do if you suspect some sort of financial exploitation? So if there's a reason to believe that there's an older person in your life who's been subject to some sort of taking advantage of, really please don't hesitate to make an inquiry and pursue this. The local police, and just like Julie did, that's your first place to go. And this is really what they do. They do this a lot. They do this more than they want to. They wish they had to do, but the local police really is your first line of defense. Another one, and this is one that as a financial advisor, I've had a little bit of experience with, but actually contacting APS, Adult Protective Services. If you think that somebody that you care for, you know of, is being taken advantage of, APS is also a great place to go. The Office of the Attorney General and the Consumer Protection Division, and then also there is a National Elder Fraud Hotline, and all of these contacts are available online, and I can give you some other resources of how to go ahead and get a hold of these, but there are several places for you to go. Maryland in particular is a state that's very progressive in this area and has got a lot of resources and support systems in place, so I encourage you to check with the state of Maryland as well. All right, now is it going to work this time? There we go. All right, so strategies for staying safe. I mean, one is you're doing exactly the right thing just by being informed. But I think, and somebody mentioned this, I think Rosemary might have mentioned this, is that regularly review your financial accounts. Check on your bank accounts and your credit card statements regularly. Just make it part of your routine to go in there and just monitor the transactions and confirm that everything looks legitimate. And one of the things that we've done is, and I think most banks now allow for you to do this, is to create an alert system so that anytime a transaction occurs that's over a certain threshold, I will get a text message saying, hey, did you just spend $1,000? Or, kind of where you can identify what that transaction limit is, but it is a way for you to immediately be informed for what's going on. And you can also, in most situations, and check with your bank just to make sure that I'm not giving you bad information here, but those alerts can go to other people. So I get them on my kids' accounts so that I can kind of keep an eye on what's happening there, but also to make sure to try and keep them safe. The other thing, and this is a relatively new development that you can create and you're encouraged to create or identify a trusted contact on your financial accounts. Again, this is in my professional role, I make sure that for all of my clients, I know who their trusted contact is, so that if anything happens that kind of sends up some flags, I can contact that person. I don't share any financial data. I can't disclose anything about their accounts or anything that's private like that, but it can be somebody that I reach out to and I say, something seems a little unusual here, or I can't get a hold of somebody, or can you help me figure something out? But just a person that I can go to just kind of get general information about a client or somebody without disclosing their financials, but just to try and assure me that what I'm experiencing is normal, or if it's not normal, they can kind of say, yeah, there's something that's not quite right here. If you don't have a family member that you can lean on to help you with your financial information, or you're just not comfortable having a family member help you with your financial transactions and accounts, there is a professional role referred to as a daily money manager. And I work with a few of these, and I think they're just fantastic. It's somebody that you hire, and they come in and you kind of establish with them the parameters of that arrangement. But in many cases, they'll take care of all of the bill paying, and they'll balance the checkbook, and they'll go through transactions. And having that second set of eyes, and for some of my clients, they just love not having to write their checks anymore or take care of all their bills. So as their bills come in, they just stack them up in a basket. And then once a week or once a month, and again, these relationships are something you determine is what works best for you. They come in, they go through everything, go through all of the documents that have come in, write the checks, and they can also, and again, all of these things are negotiable, so you figure out what works best for you, but they can send an itemized summary to a loved one. So in a couple of situations, I have older clients who live in this area, but have their adult children who live elsewhere. And so the adult children want to make sure that mom is taken care of or dad is taken care of. So they've hired a money manager to just come in, take care of all of their bills, and then every month or two, they send a summary to their child saying, okay, here's what's come in, here's what's gone out. And so everybody knows what's happening, kind of there's an extra set of eyes, but without the kids, the adult kids, having to actually own that responsibility. And it kind of helps mom or dad still feel a little bit more in control and not having to relinquish any control to their kids sooner than they want to, or if ever. Another idea, and this is something I typically recommend for a lot of people, not just older adults, but to put a credit freeze in place. So a credit freeze is something that you put in place with the three major credit agencies, Equifax, Experian, TransUnion, and you just simply say, I don't want anybody to ever take out debt on my Social Security number ever again. So if you're planning on taking out a mortgage anytime soon, or applying for a new credit card, or financing a car, you probably don't want to do this. But if you're at a point in your life where you're like, no, I'm not taking out any more debt, I'm not refinancing mortgages or buying real estate, or this just as a matter of course of action, I would put this in place. And that way, if somebody does get a hold of your Social Security number and they go to try to take out debt on your with your identity, they're going to be essentially denied, because they're not going to be able to pull credit history on you. So I think that's just a good thing for all of us to keep in mind if we're kind of not in a position to be taking on more debt.
Melanie, it's Julie. I just want to interrupt there on my credit freeze. I had done that, and I was very worried about whether or not I would be able to get the freeze off. And I recently had a situation where I needed to show someone my credit, and I was able to unfreeze it for 24 hours with just one phone call. It was very easy. So it's not it's not as scary a thing as it seems. You can have it on and you can take it off as needed and then put it back on. But I feel much safer now that I have that in place. But, and also I feel safer knowing that it was as easy to take off for 24 hours so somebody could check my credit.
Yep. No, that's a great point. And that is absolutely true. So thank you for saying that. I mentioned the setting of alerts on your credit and your bank accounts just to monitor. And then I'm going to kind of transition a little bit now into talking about bringing other people into your financial life. So and this is always such a kind of a harder topic sometimes for people to talk about, but really trying to think about when do you want to start relinquishing some of the ownership of your financial data and bringing people into your circle, both to help you make good decisions and probably eventually to help actually make some of those decisions on your behalf. So we'll shift gears just a little bit and talk about sharing information with your family. And I sometimes refer to this as the other talk. You know, I think about in my own situation with our kids, you know, there's that original talk that you have with your kids about the birds and the bees, right? And it's rather uncomfortable and you don't really want to do it. And it's really kind of, well, you get a chance to do it again later in your life. And it's still just as uncomfortable. But it's important, and it's one that I think really has to happen, and it's one that when done and done well is going to make everybody much better. The whole situation is going to be in a better place. So almost certainly your finances in your later years are going to have some impact on your adult children or your aging parents or vice versa. So kind of depending on what your role is here. Julie mentioned, you know, she plays many roles, and I think I can say that myself, and probably all of us can, that we are children, we're parents, we're aunts, we're uncles, we're nieces, we're nephews, we play different positions in different people's lives. And we're going to see how those roles really are important in caring for each other, especially when it comes to finances. The later years of life, oftentimes issues and decisions will come up, and you'll notice some role reversals. And sometimes it's a little bit harder to kind of get used to those different roles that we play, and especially when we start to see that we're taking on a different position in that relationship. So the other talk is really intended just to help you get past some of those barriers and to open up a real honest dialogue with your loved one. So talking a little bit. So why is the other talk so complicated? Why is it so hard to have these conversations? And why do we often try to avoid them? First of all, it's an emotionally challenging subject. I think we've all been told at some point in our lives that we don't talk about religion or politics or money, right? And of the three, money is the least talked about. You're more likely to have religion or politics before you want to go to money, and that's just part of our cultural sort of moray. But I think one of the other things is that aside from it being emotionally challenging, it also acknowledges that there's kind of an inevitable transformation that we don't want to face. You know, these conversations that happen later in our lives about what's going on with our money is sort of starting to say, because I'm in a different part of my life cycle, and I'm needing to start recognizing how that's going to impact you and me, and where we're going to go with that. And then there's also this just desire to maintain the existing relationship, and this is going to change that dynamic to some extent. This is going to kind of shift the way in which you work together. And I'm talking now kind of from the parent's perspective and having this conversation with the child. Again, being thoughtful to those of us who aren't necessarily in those situations, whomever you choose as sort of the persons you're bringing into this conversation. You know, this is going to shift the way in which that relationship is really oriented. So a couple of things just so that you know you're not alone. The National Hospice Foundation has found that about 75% of Americans don't make end-of-life decisions known to their family. And a Pew Research study revealed that only about 55% of adult children have talked to their parents about what to do if their parents can't live independently. So you're certainly in good company if you haven't yet had this conversation, but I really want to encourage you, and I can tell you specifically from experiences I've had, is that when you do have these conversations and when you do open into this dialogue, it does put you into a better place and it makes it better for everybody. So where do you start? How do you begin this conversation? Well, I think the first thing is that I really want to encourage that the parent, and I'm going to kind of use the word parent or principal, is the person that really should probably take the initiative. And they're the ones that kind of help to set the guidelines on how this conversation is going to go forward. And there's essentially 4 ideas that you want to cover most often in these conversations. One is, how do you finance for an uncertain future? And how do you budget for things that you just really don't know what they are or how long they're going to last? So it's opening up a conversation that's just so full of uncertainty, and that's uncomfortable too, but you want to just at least get that conversation started. Other conversations or other components of the conversation are, selecting living arrangements. Will you, and if so, when will you move out of your home? And then where are you going to go? Getting the medical care you need, who will advocate for your medical needs and how are they going to do that? And then who's going to be taking charge at the end of your life, and how do you want your kids or your agents to be taking over those decisions when you're really no longer able to or just not wanting to? So the goal of this whole process is to try and provide you with the tools and the roadmap that you need to really kind of successfully engage your family. So oftentimes when starting this conversation, I'll encourage people to start thinking about, what is the meaning of money, as well as your own families and personal goals. And so before you even open up this conversation, there's probably some internal soul searching and dialogue that you need to have about what's important to you. In the conversation, you'll probably have some questions, concerns, hopes, fears, fears about wealth, fears about responsibilities, fears about the future. So these are all very normal things, and don't feel, walk into this space recognizing that these are going to be very natural experiences. You might want to spend some time just talking about your family's story, maybe the history of its wealth and its enterprises and things that it's experienced over the course of its history. Invite younger members of the family to contribute their thinking and be a part of the conversation, and maybe even kind of establish a values framework for personal and family decision-making and expectations going forward, but also really trying very much so to be sensitive to individual differences and rivalries. And recognize, this is really an important part of this conversation, is that it is an ongoing conversation, and that these meetings or these opportunities to engage with one another like this should be sort of an ongoing process. So oftentimes the very first time you step into this space, it'll be at a very high level and you're just kind of tiptoeing and getting a sense of where people are. So there may not be a lot that is accomplished in the first couple of conversations other than trying to just create a comfortable space for you to engage in this way. So how do we really start to get through this when it starts to get tough? So if the conversation starts to get a little emotional, here's a few tips. Take a deep breath before responding to some things, and express real sympathy and empathy for your family members to try and see things from their points of view. I really, as in most conversations, I find that it's best to do more listening than talking. So try and put yourself in that spot if you can. And then be sensitive to sort of push button behaviors. Everybody has certain kind of quirks that drive other family members crazy. That's normal. That's called a family. Try to acknowledge these yourself and attempt to avoid saying things that can make things more complex than they already are, because this is already a complicated sort of topic. If appropriate in your family, throw in some humor, try to add a little levity here and there, because these are heavy topics. These are heavy things to talk about. So what do we want to do? We want to try and set the stage. And so the first thing what we probably want to do before we even have the conversation is start with your own mental state. Then we want to factor in the others who are going to be involved in the conversation. Establish some frame of reference, and I'll elaborate a little bit more on that. And then also just help to really keep a comfortable tone. And so let's dive into each one of these just a little bit. So when you're emotionally trying to set the stage, starting with your own mental state is probably the best place to start. So come to grip with some practical, yet kind of emotionally laden issues. First of all, the idea of role reversals, and acknowledge the inevitability of ceding some decision-making and managing of day-to-day activities to your kids or whomever you've identified as your agents. So come kind of just sit with that and become aware that that's normal. Establish some ground rules on potential circumstances or trigger points that will affect the change and the responsibilities in these key functions. And I'll spend a little bit of time talking about that. And then also embrace it as liberating and not just as denigrating. It's the gain of this kind of security and freedom and not necessarily a loss of power and control. And I'll give a little anecdote here. As Kathy mentioned, I'm a financial advisor, and most of my clients are 55 plus. They're kind of transitioning from work to retirement and going on through the rest of their lives. And I really, truly adore all of my clients. They are friends, and I enjoy that they let me into their lives and be a part of it. But I do have two clients that are my favorites, and they are my parents. And so when I started managing my parents' portfolios and helping them with their money, you can imagine this is an unusual dynamic, right? That my parents are, my dad was my high school principal, for heaven's sakes. This was quite a shift for him to get used to thinking of me in this different way. And so we did it very gradually. And I remember, you know, I had been a financial advisor for several years before they decided that they wanted to work with me. But over those several years, they would spend time saying, hey, you know, we're thinking about doing this. And I wanted very much so to respect and honor their time frame and their process. So it was several kind of gentle conversations along the way of, well, our current financial advisor mentioned this and doing this, and that sounds great, and maybe you should think about this. But I let them own it. And I think that's really important, is that the principal, as I refer to it, has to be the one that is the managing director here. They're the one, you get to call the shots, and the rest of us are here simply to support you. And I think to that point, you really need to decide, you know, how much to share and when to share it. And it has to be on your terms. So don't ever feel pressured to relinquish any type of ownership or autonomy before you're ready to, but also recognize none of us are getting out of here alive. And unless you've had a very tragic circumstance, we're all going to have diminishing capacity. And so just starting to recognize that you want to find the right people to support you in this process, it's going to make it so much easier for everybody. I'm now at the point with my parents where they really could not be less interested in what's happening with their portfolios. They don't ask me questions anymore. They love not having to worry about it. They just know that when they need some money, they call me. When they have a question about money, they call me. But most of the time, we've now been working together for a couple of decades, so it takes some time. But it's been so nice that it's been able to happen very gradually like that. All right. So in addition to sharing, let's see, where am I next one here? So emotionally and strategically setting the stage, factors in your kids' emotions. So as you imagine the conversation with your kids, expect a jumble of emotions and reactions. It's going to be kind of wide-ranging at times. It could be sort of contradictory at times. You'll probably experience components of fear and sadness, nervousness, anger, panic. All of these things are normal. Again, we're talking about things that are a little bit complicated, and we've got siblings involved, which can be all the more interesting once you start to have some of those dynamics added in. Imagine which issues are going to be a little bit more troubling or terrifying to which children. I'm really going to encourage you to look into a book that AARP publishes. It's actually called The Other Talk. I generally give that to most of my clients as they get to a point where they are starting to imagine this. It's got a great sort of rubric for how you might want to guide this. A lot of the material I'm using here today comes from that book, but at the back of it, there's just a plethora of resources. So it's a great, and I've got a copy of it here. You're welcome to take a look at it. So, and just another statistic there, the National Alliance on Caregiving says that 17% said that caring for a loved one took a real toll on their health, and 31% described the situation as really emotionally stressful. And so I think an effort to kind of mitigate that and to work in the best interest of everybody and to really reduce these numbers or the probability of that happening in your situation is why you want to engage in these conversations, because that stress is much more likely to happen when you haven't been able to have these dialogues. All right, the other part, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but trying to be aware of the evolving knowledge base and sort of the trigger points. So when I talk about evolving knowledge base, what I'm really referring to here is that information changes, dynamics change, and so whatever components are in your family's dialogue about who's doing what, recognize that things are going to evolve over time. And so somebody needs to kind of own or be aware of the fact that what you're doing probably needs to be revisited with some regularity. So insurance forms, sources of funding, living arrangements, estate planning, and regulatory changes, these are all things that need to be sort of revisited regularly. So even if you put together a plan with your family, you probably need to go back and check into it and confirm that those original plans still are valid. And then trigger points is more talking about when and how to start shifting decision-making and responsibilities. AARP also offers tests for physical, visual, mental dexterity. So I would encourage, do this on your own just to make sure that you still feel very confident about your abilities to do things, and maybe use that as a guideline for when you need to start making some changes. Another trigger, I have one client who told me that as soon as I bounce 5 checks, I'm not writing checks anymore. I'm giving this responsibility up to somebody else. That's their cue in their mind that they aren't capable of doing this or not doing it to the degree or the level that they want to be able to. So I just figure out, what are the cues for you that might identify some changes in your processes. Then when you are ready to have when you're having the meeting with your family, really be careful or be sensitive to setting the tone. Usually I'd say you want these to be very informal conversations. This is not the time, much to my husband's chagrin, to bring out the PowerPoint. You want to just be able to sit much more conversationally. You want it to be collaborative, productive, loving, empowering, and for everybody involved. And I think to the kind of a point I'd mentioned earlier is that you are the managing director of this as the principal. You're the one who really gets to call the shots, but also recognize that your kids or the other agents are full partners, and they are not your little corporate minions that you just get to give instruction to, because quite honestly, their participation is voluntary. So you want them to be engaged in a very respectful way. Each member of this partnership understands that the responsibilities change as conditions evolve, and the goals are really to frame decisions now before a crisis to ensure better outcomes so that there's less panic, less stress. You want to be able to manage your affairs in a way that you've intended, and to avoid choices that you don't want, and just to ensure that everybody benefits and everybody contributes. So kind of a lot of different ideas there about how to share and engage with your family. But I want to also now kind of open it up to questions about anything I've said. And also, I know there were some earlier questions about power of attorneys too. So yeah. Remind me, who had the power of you had the power of attorney question, right, Trish? So powers of attorney, Maryland actually has statutory language. So there is a form that you can download online that for creating your power of attorney. Now, two things about that. You can have a durable power of attorney or a springing power of attorney. A springing power of attorney is a document that identifies who will get authority, be able to act in your stead under certain conditions. There has to be a springing event that triggers that power. And typically it's, 2 doctors have to indicate that you are not of capacity or unable to act on your own behalf, or there's language there that identifies what the springing incident might be. So that's one possibility. Otherwise, so I think if you want the springing one, you have to actually ask your attorney to draft that. I don't believe that's a component of the statutory language. I'm saying that, and I'm pretty confident that I'm true, but I should probably find out for sure. The one that the statutory one is a durable, which is a very powerful document. And to your point, you don't want to assign this to somebody that you would ever question their intention, because once you have a power of attorney in place, they act as you. They have absolute all authority to do whatever you could do. So the person that you choose to have this authority, this role, you have obviously a lot of confidence and trust in. Now, you can revoke it. In fact, everything you do, you can revoke and reconsider. So don't think that, and in fact, my original power of attorney was my dad. My current power of attorney, that's now been revoked. My current power of attorney is my husband. When we start to worry about his capacity, it'll probably be my sister or my daughter or somebody else. So these are things, again, this is where we kind of go back to how your plans. I missed the first part of what you said. Yes. Thank you. So yes, your power of attorney typically is both witnessed and notarized. There's usually at least 2 other signatures on there. Yeah. So. And then you asked a question, what if you don't have, that's a tricky one. Some trust companies, and they are few and far between, I'm actually looking for one right now because the one I knew doesn't do it anymore, will offer power of attorney services for a fee, but that's hard to find. It's just really hard to find. So you really are kind of needing to have somebody that you know. So, but look outside of your family. I mean, it could be anybody. Yeah. Frances, you had a question. Oh. So, I mean, that's a great question, Frances. I mean, I know that I've just asked for the document back.
Yeah, and Melanie. Could you please repeat the question?
Sure. Yeah, no. Yeah, good. Thank you, Kathy. So the question was, when you are changing your power of attorney, how do you notify the original one that their powers are being revoked, or how do you technically kind of revoke those powers? And I know I'll talk again personally, I just asked Dad to give me it back, that it's not him anymore and it's now my husband. So that's, you know what, I'm going to say, talk to your estate planning attorney. I'm sorry, I don't know for sure. I don't know that that's the case. Oh, so somebody had suggested that you need to send a certified letter to the person from whom the powers are being revoked. I mean, I don't know that there's any harm in doing that, but I don't know that would take care of it. I don't know. And I'm sorry, that's more of a legal question. Yeah. Oh.
I'm Suzanne Welch. I told this story at our prayer forum I've gone through on the last 6 months. I have an older sister, no children, divorced, and she needed someone to be her power of attorney and to help with her estate work. She approached the other talk by saying, if something happens to me, it's all in the closet. That was her approach. And I had to work with her to say, that's not how, I know you're giving me a gift of your thoughts and ideas, but having them all written down in a closet in your house isn't helpful. I don't know your wishes. I don't know if they cover everything. So it was one of these sibling rivalry conversations, but we've, through this whole process, I helped coax out of her. It was not easy. It was not easy. Where everything was. What are her wishes? What are her wishes? You don't know them if they're on a closet and if they're on the floor of a closet. You don't know what the wishes are. So if you're the principal, I'm saying this, think about yourself as the principal. It's a communication of explaining to your loved ones what you want, what your thoughts are. What are your thoughts if you're in a hospital? What, do you have thoughts? What are they? And convey and have that conversation, as unpleasant as it may be. It is a gift to them. It was a true gift to them to have that conversation. And my older sister even got to the point where she went to a funeral home and made all that arrangement herself because she didn't want to burden family with that choice. And she wrote out what she wanted for her memorial service and the whole 9 yards. But it all started with, it's in the closet in my bedroom.
And I can't say it better than Suzanne just did, but if anybody has ever had to take care of somebody who hasn't had their affairs in order and hasn't had these conversations, you will immediately develop an appreciation for how valuable it is, and you will do it for the people that you care for. And that is probably the biggest when I'm working with somebody and their parent passes away and they know nothing. Within months, they are having these conversations with their kids and they're getting their affairs in order because they say, I just never want to do that to anybody else. It is the most loving act, especially the most loving final act, I think, that you can do. And especially, and I don't want to distract you with horror stories, but if there's any consternation within your family, and you leave any ambiguity or you leave a lot of this work to them, it's going to exacerbate it. And so if your goal is to bring your family together and to really be thoughtful and caring about them, you will engage in this conversation and you will do it. And I also say, and not that this is, but I've had cases where, especially with legacies, if there's going to be some sort of an inheritance and there's a disparity in how the inheritance is being distributed, you want to be the one to communicate that to the beneficiaries so that they're mad at you and you're gone. You don't want that to be something that creates a chasm between them. So, and no matter what, you want to be the one that gets to communicate your wishes, your intentions. It is your life. These are your assets. These are and so really you should own and control that and that whole narrative.
Well, not only that, but you have to have everything in writing. Because telling Earl what I want or telling my daughter what I want is one thing, but for them to go to a doctor and say, well, she told me she didn't want resuscitation, the doctor's going to need to see it in writing. So it's very important to put it in writing, whether you see a lawyer or not, to get it down in writing. And then Earl had a question or comment. Go ahead, Earl.
Well, I was just indicating tremendous support for what Melanie was saying about how to treat your loved ones in your final action in a loving way. And what she said just resonates with me. There are books out there that you can buy where you fill out the details and you hand it to someone. Who are the contact people? Who are your doctors? What are the bank accounts? What are the passwords? All that can be written down. And if you do it, it's an act of mercy. So I was just hitting the thumbs up for what Melanie was saying.
Okay.
And if anybody's interested, I have a document. It's called the Family Inventory. It's a PDF document. Oh, anybody can. It comes from my company, but anybody can have it. But it's a great place for you to accumulate all of this information, and it comes in a PDF form, so it's very editable. You can go in there and change it. Then you can forward it to family members, print it out. But and Kathy has such a great idea, and this is I love this. It's keep a copy of this document or something comparable to it in a Ziploc bag and put it in your freezer. And it's referred to as ice in case of emergency. And so you put it with your ice, right? And it's a pretty safe place, you know where it is. And actually there are, and Kathy reminded me of this, oftentimes paramedics will go to people's freezers to get this information to find, because they've been trained that if this is a really good strategy when you're wondering what your DNR is or what your, you know. I can certainly send it to, if I send it to Joanne and you'll forward it on, great. No, I'll send, and then a second document I have, I have done some work with Gallers, and they have a great book on funeral planning. And I'll share that with you too, because it's just a really nice way for, I mean, I gave that to my mom and she was a little bit like taken aback initially, right? But then she's like, oh, but I want this hymn, and I want everybody to have dilly bars because my mom loves the Dairy Queen. So I want dilly bars to be served at my reception following the, I'm like, I wouldn't have known to do dilly bars. Yeah, I'll share that. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, a ton. Yeah, that's a challenge. And yeah, so the question is, you know, what do you do when you have family members who are outside of the US? You know, you've got a real global family. You're going to have challenges with international people executing anything on your behalf in the US. That's so, and so I typically say your POA, your successor trustees, they all need to be US citizens. It's really hard. This again, talk to your estate planning attorney. They're the best person to guide you on this, but generally that's what I've heard is either that, and you can do corporate trustees. Corporate trustees, again, they cost. I mean, it's a company that's going to act in that fact, but they'll, first of all, they'll execute beautifully against what your instructions are, and it solves that problem. Yes. Right. No, so the question has to do with, you know, should your power of attorney be physically close to you? Is that a fair summary? I mean, ideally, it makes life a lot easier, but, you know, fortunately, we live in a world where technology kind of takes away geographical barriers. So I think you really go with the person that is, first of all, most up for the task. And that I didn't emphasize enough, but being a power of attorney is no small job. And you want somebody, first of all, obviously, that you trust implicitly, but also has the capacity for doing a lot of work. So I would make that my number one priority as opposed to location.
And Melanie, I don't know if I'm interrupting anything.
Go ahead, Kathy.
It's important not to put it in your safe deposit box.
Yeah, well, safe deposit box are really, they're a thing of the past. I mean, it's time to let go of that. First of all, banks don't even really offer them that much anymore, but they've been my nemesis in that, you know, people will put all their documents in their safety deposit box, but then once they're incapacitated, nobody can get access to that box. So get yourself a good fire safe, and keep it in the house. I don't mean to throw the banks don't even want to do this business anymore anyway. So it's not like I'm taking away their business. So, but yeah, I would say that's not something that you probably want to be doing.
Yeah. And you don't want to leave it with the info with your lawyer, because you might need it on the weekend, and he's not going to work on the weekend generally. Any others?
Rick is raising his hand. Yeah.
Could you ask him to speak up? Come to the mic.
I'll repeat it once he.
Okay.
So yeah, this is something we did. So Rick was telling the story about his mom. So his mom had some housework done. She had a contractor come to the house, and after the fact, we learned that she paid a ridiculous amount for something that should not have cost nearly as much as it did. And so we created an agreement with her that whenever she's going to have anything done or purchase anything that's over a certain dollar amount, she's going to run it by us. And more so for her to communicate that to the vendor, as opposed to really, she doesn't need our permission. And we really wanted to make sure that she realized this was not about getting our permission to spend her money, but just about having a second set of ears and eyes to kind of run things past. We've talked about getting, second and third quotes, but also to let that vendor know that there's somebody else in the conversation here that encourages them to act reputably, right? And so sometimes we say, and if you don't even want to come to us with that, it's okay, but just communicating to them that, you know what, whenever I spend more than $1,000, I run it by my son. And it's also a really great way to get out of those pressure tactics where they say, well, it's now or never. Then you're just, I'm sorry, then it's never, because I have this agreement with my son, and so having sort of those little outs, I think are another good way to protect yourselves against nefarious actors.
That's a really good point. Thank you. Anyone else? Well, thank you all.
There's Kathy, one last question here.
Great.
Very suddenly, we relied on him, and this got dropped on me on Friday night. He had no will. I had to go because he was in California, and I didn't know his stuff. For $3,000, I'm pretty good at this kind of thing. I had to pay a funeral home where to have his body taken that very night.
Yeah.
And I had to work with police reporters, just a lot of things that you can face, but there's often help that you can find from agencies. If you can ask the right questions, yes. Like, you don't feel like you have to try to sort it all out of your own head. Just remember to do it.
Yeah, thank you for that. Right. No, and the point there was just, kind of being caught off guard with a very sudden and tragic death and being on the other side of the country. So. Right. Yeah, the experience is, it's hard enough when you lose a loved one, right? And your emotional state, understandably, is not going to be in its best place. And to be needing to make these huge decisions at a point when you're grappling with a lot of emotional stuff yourself, it's just, it's almost, the worst possible scenario. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I know Sarah will talk about this next week, but St. John's has a form that you can fill out at any point to make your funeral wishes known. And that's a real comfort to your family. I've had to make funeral arrangements for 2 parishioners who didn't have anything in place, and their families asked me to handle everything. And I had no idea what to do, none whatsoever. And it would have been so nice if people had filled out the forms in advance, just to let you know which prayers you prefer, if you want communion or you don't want communion, and what hymns you'd like to have sung and who you'd like to speak at your funeral. Very simple things that if you die without that, it's just going to be up to the clergy or your family to figure it out, and it may not be anything near what you want. So put it in writing. I'm a big advocate for putting it in writing. There's also a book that Earl mentioned 2 weeks ago when Tom Gentile was speaking. It's called "I'm Dead, Now What?" And it is similar to the forms that Melanie has in her handout that RBC has done. And it takes you through the whole process and gives you lots of space to write your passwords, which change all the time. So you have to keep that one up to date. But it's just great to have things in writing. So thank you, everyone.
Also like a true archivist.
And sign and date all your documents. They're not worth much if they're not signed and dated. So
perhaps Sarah could say something about her.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, first, thank you, Melanie and Julie, for being here and offering your expertise on these important topics. Next week, next Sunday is the third of this 4-part series. It will be during the 9 a.m. adult ed hour right here on the spiritual side of these questions about navigating life's changing seasons. So I will lead us in a discussion of finding and knowing one's worth and purpose through the changing seasons of life. So I hope that many of you can be here either in person or on Zoom for that next week at 9.
And it's Suzanne Welch. If I can announce the last of the 4, which is on February 26th at 12 o'clock again, we've invited Seabury for Resources care managers to come talk to us about care management, either for you or it could be for younger adults dealing with issues about their parents or older loved ones. So the care managers will be here and you can ask them a lot of questions. So thank you. And thank you for coming.
We're so glad everyone was here. Thank you. And thanks again to Julie and to Melanie. It was wonderful to have your expertise. Have a great week and see you all next week. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.